Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, April 5th, 2024. Time for another show. I am totally unprepared for this one. Well, it's been a wild morning, as many of them are, but nothing worse than usual. But for some reason, I don't know, it has set me off on the schedule today, and on top of it all, added pressure on today's show. Not the pressure some of you might be thinking, but Justice is away from the desk today, taking care of business at home, and everything is on lockdown and on timers. Now, normally the breaks are pretty hard scheduled anyway, but the exit from the show, which we sometimes fudge a little bit, spend an extra 15 seconds or so reading another paragraph, not going to be available to us today. Do you think I'll remember that when the time comes, under the pressure of the moment? Probably not. Does that mean I will trail off in mid-sentence and you won't get to hear the end of our music and have a, I don't know what, the emotional closure of hearing our music decrescendo and fade out? I don't know. I'll do my best to try and get out of here on time, but if there's a weird cutoff at the end in the live show, you'll know why that is. But we'll do our best to stick to the actual schedule and get as much of these stories as we can out onto the record. It's a jam-packed Friday. Lots happening in court for the fascist guy. It was a hell of a day there. It was a big day, I guess you could say, internationally, by which I mean the one or two international stories that we actually focus on had some movement, and I think you all saw that, and I don't know whether we'll spend any time evaluating that or not, but I think we kind of, had to see what was coming. The news there, of course, a phone call between Joe Biden and Netanyahu, which, was a long time coming, and all the pressure that has been building on Joe Biden to deliver a strong message of, okay, that's it. That's enough with what you're doing there. Enough with this nonsense in Gaza. The way you're prosecuting this war has everyone on edge. It can't go on. And, well, that's more or less what we got, but in the most diplomatic possible language, because how else are you going to approach these things? You can't just dive in there. Well, you can't do what a lot of people who have been raising fists and shouting has to be done, wanted done, which is to go and jump through the phone and, I guess, beat up the Prime Minister of Israel? I don't know. But he delivered him a solid message, as solid as diplomatic messages can be. The problem is that the country is being run by their own version of Trump. So he put the pressure on him and said, look, this thing has to end. In fact, he actually said there really needs to be an immediate ceasefire. You got to work for the release of those hostages, but the active fighting has to end. And, of course, the death of the aid workers, which looks to all the world as though they were targeted. There's still no way for me to come up with a really good explanation about why they weren't targeted. I think I have to guess. Well, they were. I mean, those are precision weapons. That was the target. The question is, how did that end up happening? And why did it end up happening to vehicles that were supposedly so clearly identified? That is a separate question. And we could spend a moment on that because it would be pure speculation on my part. But why not have that? But he did deliver the message of immediate ceasefire, which is of interest. And now we get to see whether Israel's own Trump commits on the phone to, well, he didn't commit to the immediate ceasefire, I don't think. I guess we will. We'll take a look at the readout and try and find out exactly what happened. And I'm not certain whether that made it to pocket or not. I think so. At least some of the things that were circulated yesterday. And so that, and of course we have something else to catch up on that subject. So why don't we'll spend a couple of minutes on the Israel question and bring you up to date on that. But let's see. The Actually, here's presenting itself to me like the, what's it? Forget it. I can't even remember what I'm thinking of. But at any rate, the Guardian's article, what aid routes will Israel open into Gaza and what happens next week? Part of the discussion was, in addition to the call for an immediate ceasefire and the delivery of the message of it was unacceptable to be targeting these aid workers, whenever anybody presents you with an unacceptable, especially in diplomatic language, you take it with a grain of salt. It's unacceptable. Sure. Well, you don't accept it. That is awful. Now what? Right? Those people are still dead. And more people probably will die, but at least I know that you want to say the word unacceptable. And with the country being run by their version of Trump, I'm a little worried that the commitments that were made, I guess the most concrete commitments was to open more border crossings so that more aid can get in. A lot of these border crossings haven't really been border crossings for many years. They were just closed. Maybe originally they were closed temporarily, but then they ended up just being sealed, closed, and there was never any intention of opening them up again because that's the Israeli policy, seal off and isolate Gaza. So there was a commitment to open up more border crossings so that more aid could get across, and now I wonder, does the Israeli Trump walk away and just not do it? What if I just didn't honor the agreement? And I mean, underlying the whole thing is I'm sure the Israeli belief, well, are the Americans really going to do the sorts of things that we have to worry about them doing? Even if they restricted aid to us, even if they stopped shipments of weapons, what would that really do to us? Would that mean we would just have to get them elsewhere? And then, of course, I was musing a little bit on that, what would have to happen, the ridiculousness that would have to happen internally, externally, etc., in order for, say, some other power center, the BRICS countries, to fill some of that gap, because some of them that are in the alliance now and some that are seeking to enter it are not friendly to Israel. Iran, for instance. But others are ambivalent and others are actually friendly to Israel. There's a big split among BRICS on Israel and what to do with it. And I mean, what a wide variety of approaches to Israel among the BRICS countries. Anyway, but could some that are more ambivalent and more ambitious and have stockpiles of weapons maybe step in and fill the gap in the hopes of being able to exert more influence over Israel than the United States for once? On the one hand, I would say that's the usual geopolitical play, so someone will try it. On the other hand, I guess I have to tell you, on the basis of the last 6 months or 10 years, depending on how you look at it, good luck trying to have influence over Israel. Anyway, yes, so the Guardian has actual organized thoughts about this, thanks to Peter Beaumont writing, what aid routes will Israel open into Gaza and what happens next week? Let's find out. Why don't we? Israel has bowed to U.S. pressure. That's a fantastic formulation for the United States. I don't know whether it's really true or not. Israel has bowed to U.S. pressure to allow more aid into the Strip, but questions remain about how quickly it will take effect. I mean, that was everything that the American leadership was looking for right there in the headline. Will they get any of it? That's the question. Israel has announced it will reopen a key crossing into Gaza and allow more aid through another crossing and a port, after a warning from Joe Biden that future U.S. support for Israel will depend on it taking concrete action to protect civilians and aid workers. But will this make a substantial difference for Palestinians in Gaza, where Israel's war has now killed an estimated 33,000 people and created a humanitarian crisis? Well, yeah, we're at the point where you say, well, it damn well better. That's the whole point of it, and get on it. But yeah, I guess there's also the point at which you say, well, I'm trucking aid in. Like, for instance, one of the northern border crossings is going to be opened, and I'm not certain how far they'll have to drive to find people to be able to receive aid. But anyway, I assume that conditions on the ground or observers on the ground have a far better idea of whether or not a northern opening or northern crossing makes particular sense, and why not get it if you can? So, what's the significance of Israel's announcements that it will reopen land aid routes? Humanitarian organizations have long said that the most effective way to get urgently needed aid into Gaza, where the population is facing catastrophic levels of hunger, is via land routes. It's always going to be a little easier, I think. Before the war began, with Hamas's attack on October 7th of last year, reciting the particulars, which killed 1,200 people, up to 500 trucks a day were crossing into Gaza prior to that. The World Food Program said last month that to meet the most basic needs of Gaza, at least 300 trucks would need to cross daily into the territory, while Jordan, the U.S., and other countries have been airdropping aid. And World Central Kitchen, 7 of whose workers were killed by Israel this week, including 3 Britons, this is The Guardian speaking, had been distributing supplies. The aid they had been able to deliver, though, was nowhere near the level needed. What routes will be opened? According to the Israeli government statement released on Thursday night, it will allow the temporary provision of humanitarian aid through Ashdod and Erez crossings and increase Jordanian aid through Kerem Shalom. Kerem Shalom is in southern Israel, a well-established truck crossing, while Erez in northern Gaza is the site of the main passenger terminal for entry into the territory from Israel. Use of the port of Ashdod appears to be the most significant. With its established handling and inspection capacity, Ashdod, which lies about 40 kilometers or about 25 miles north, for those of us still on the imperial system, I guess, right? Potentially represents the closest and most direct route for large volumes of humanitarian aid to enter. That is the port route. How quickly can they be used? That's a good logistical question. While Israel has tried to suggest that the Erez crossing was not viable because of the damage done to it on October 7th, the reality is that the Israeli military traffic has been using ad hoc crossing points where the IDF has taken down sections of the border fence since the beginning of the ground offensive last year. Any route through Erez leads quickly to Gaza's paved road system, including the main north-south road, and will provide access to the area of immediate greatest need, northern Gaza, where tens of thousands of people are experiencing famine and subsisting on barely 250 calories a day. Could Israel have done this sooner? For weeks, Israeli officials tried to claim there was insufficient aid entering Gaza, or that there was sufficient, I'm really off the game today, sufficient aid entering Gaza, despite repeated accusations by the UN and aid and humanitarian groups that it was actively obstructing the delivery of supplies. Last night's announcement by Israel, after the U.S. warning that its support depended on immediate steps being taken to assist Gaza's civilian population, underscores the fact that Israel could have made this decision sooner when confronted with the growing starvation of Gaza's population, but chose not to. The Israeli cabinet's decision followed briefings by foreign ministry officials who warned that if the humanitarian aid were not increased, Israel would risk international sanctions and even an arms embargo, saying they had received very clear signals from their counterparts in the U.S. and in Europe that Israel would face unprecedented sanctions if the aid were not increased immediately. Yes. Now, that's something that people have been saying you could use as leverage for a long time. And they didn't. Or at least it didn't work for a long time. And, again, I don't know. I could imagine a situation in which the threat is made, but even the people making the threat know that it's a hollow threat just given the stockpiles of weapons and weapons already in the pipeline. The Israelis could conduct this war for, let's say 6 months before they really began to worry about, okay, if you say you're not going to resupply us, that will soon actually be a pinch that we feel. Maybe now would be a great time to listen to you. Or another way of looking at it, maybe now would be a great time to reissue those threats because there would be some actual threat behind it, as opposed to, it's going to take you 6 months to feel this pressure anyway. So, it doesn't really make a great deal of sense, and it makes us look even more hollow and weak to level these threats and not be able to deliver on them. So we'll wait. Maybe. I don't know. Biden's own language was unusually... Oh, I'm sorry. I think I've skipped something here. What are the potential holdups? Let's look at that. Where we missed here, Israel has been accused of slow-walking security inspections for trucks that are already waiting to cross into Gaza, which could continue, but the warning from Washington has been clear. In the coming hours and days, we will be looking for concrete, tangible steps that they're taking, said White House spokesperson John Kirby on Thursday. Biden's own language was also unusually precise in suggesting that Israel would be closely watched for concrete compliance. A readout of Biden's call with Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu said Biden, quote, made clear the need for Israel to announce and implement a series of specific, concrete, there it is again, and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers. The White House summary added, he made clear that U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate action on these steps. How will that aid be distributed? International aid agencies operating inside Gaza could bring in more personnel. The UN, how did they say UNRWA? I don't even know if they have a pronunciation to it, but the UN Refugee Works Agency, is that right? The main UN agency for Palestinian refugees employs thousands of staff inside Gaza and would be best placed to be involved, although Israel has blocked it from distributing aid in northern Gaza. The Biden administration has suggested previously that problems of theft and looting of convoys could be addressed by flooding Gaza with aid, dramatically reducing the sense of desperation. I hope so. Does this mean the war is coming to an end? Last section in this one. It's all the right questions being asked. Just don't know whether we really have any answers or not. But the last question, does this mean the war is coming to an end? The U.S., UN, and other governments, including the U.K., have made it clear that they are deeply unhappy with the very high level of Palestinian civilian deaths in Israel's campaign. That's slightly as you can put it. Biden's reference to the need to mitigate civilian harm and protect humanitarian workers suggests that Israel is unlikely to be able to continue conducting this war with its current high tolerance for civilian fatalities. While the Israeli government has suggested that increased aid access would allow it to continue fighting, the U.S. has also made it clear that it strongly opposes the plans it has, be a million. This is, okay, a little bit of an editing problem here. The U.S. has made it clear it strongly opposes the plans it has, be a million. Million people are sheltering. I don't know. It has to operate in an area where 1 million people are sheltering, not least Israel's unrealistic plans to evacuate civilians before an assault, all of which suggests that space for Israeli operations at the scale seen over the past 6 months is shrinking, and with that, there is potential for a decrease in violence. Well, I don't know. Maybe. Worth exploring, and, the best and most, I even hesitate to say the most concrete, but certainly the most substantive moves by the U.S. government towards making demands for an end to the war and an end to the absurd targeting that they've been doing, both of aid workers and civilians. So maybe, fingers crossed, what can you do? I'm glad the statements have been made. And I think a relatively positive reaction to it among the U.S. political crowd. I couldn't tell you actually at this point what the dedicated pro-Palestinian longtime activists have to say about this. I imagine it's not nearly as glowing, but why would it be? So, at any rate, I did see an interesting discussion about things going on. Apparently, maybe we'll check in on Jennifer Rubin over at the Washington Post, as Atrios points out on social media. Man, even Jen Rubin, and includes a screenshot of her piece's headline from yesterday. Israel is at a crisis point. The world has had enough. And the commentary there basically saying, maybe that's... maybe it is a turning point, and it's not so much necessarily in Israel, although the effects will be felt there, but elsewhere in the world, including the United States. And just some good chatter here between some good commenters on Blue Sky, for instance, Ryan Cooper commenting on Atrios' post here. There's a little conversation here. You find out who your real friends are when you see who will try to stop you smashing yourself in the face with a ball-peen hammer. Okay. And Boyd Chowder, Jim Henley Music, commenting there. I've been a broken record about this for I think close to 15 years now, but I don't think the liberal critique that Israel is hurting itself holds up. Revisionists won. They want all the land. They've gotten more and more, and they've come very close to getting away with it. That's certainly the second part. Seems a true statement. Revisionists have won in Israel, and the place is very different than it had been for the previous 55, 60 years. That's very true. Although, I'm not so certain about the thing about that he rejects the idea that Israel is hurting itself. A good section of Israel feels considerably disappointed by the direction, even though many of them still support, broadly speaking, some measure of this war effort. And then Ryan Cooper chiming in again and saying, well, look, directly to Jim here, you may well be right, but I also think Benny Gantz is good on this, and offers this excerpt from something he had written saying, my interpretation is I guess I better open it up and make sure that I saw Gantz and I thought Benny Gantz. No, it's John Gantz, whose article he is quoting here, a Substack unpopular front news. And isn't that interesting? Okay, well, it pays to check and make sure you're quoting the right Gantz. I was going to say, this doesn't sound like Benny Gantz as I'm beginning to read this, but John Gantz saying, my interpretation remains that Hamas fully intended to provoke the most terrible possible response from Israel. I think that's probably true. Their hope seems to be that Israel will commit such a massive atrocity in response, and guess what? That it will lose international legitimacy. Well, guess what? All the sympathy that Jews as a people and the support Israel as a project receive, and it is a project, keep that in mind, receive as a result of the Holocaust will be erased or at least badly damaged. Every anti-Semite in the world will be able to say, see, they are just as bad. Stop listening to them complain. Maybe they have it coming. Wow, well, maybe onto something there in terms of the plan. Anyway, this would be the beginning of the end for Israel. After all, despite its military prowess, if it remains a small nation dependent on the support of bigger powers for arms and ammunition, if that goes, it is a trap, a prison, just another forsaken stretch of land, not unlike Gaza. That could very well be true. That had been, I think, had been simmering beneath the surface and relatively obvious to close observers for a while, but it was well stated and clearly stated there. Yes, the October 7th attacks, it really does seem, were designed to provoke the worst possible response. And you should understand a number of things about that, including the fact that Hamas, as a militant Islamic jihadist organization, isn't at the ideological level anyway terribly moved by mass Palestinian death. That's martyrdom, and it's a good thing in their view. I mean, there's the element of religion here. It does, drive people to come to these odd conclusions, and that's something for both sides. There's religion involved all over. But yeah, I mean, I guess if you're of the opinion that martyrdom is a fantastic idea, the idea that thousands upon thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians will pay the price for your audacious attack doesn't bother you. Not only does it not bother you, it excites you. That's problematic. And I was just sort of thinking about the religion thing. As I'm thinking about as the holiday of Passover, Pesach in Hebrew, Passover in English, is coming up this month, later in the month. I'm just thinking about, well, it's a common refrain not only in the Passover Seder service as we're reading, recounting the story of Exodus primarily, but there's an additional mention not only about the Exodus and the oppression of the Israelites, or the Hebrews then, under Egyptian slavery, but a reminder, both in the Seder service and in all sorts of services. It's a part of the liturgy, I guess, is a reminder that, and I think the way they put it in English is, not only was there the Egyptian bondage, but in every age, in every era, some have risen to oppress us, and, thanking God that God had delivered us each time. But that, they cite the slavery in Egypt, Babylonian exile, war with Assyrians, war with everybody, and throughout the ages, all the way up through the Holocaust. It's intended to, the English version, to evoke that and to say that so for years and since forever, Jews have found themselves oppressed elsewhere, and of course, actually in the same territory of Israel in the olden days, but been saved by God. This is a religious ceremony each time, and how wonderful that is, etc., etc. And that will be recited over again, and I'm sure is probably on Israeli minds, particularly religious Israeli minds, as they imagine that October 7th fits into that pattern. That once again, and for the Palestinians to be able to rally worldwide support and to be able to lean on previously already dedicated anti-Semites to do it, is just another arising of more oppression in another age. And this war may be God's deliverance. Uh-oh, that's dangerous. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. By the way, I want to thank a friend of the show and friend of everybody, really, Gil Aquino, who has been, interestingly, offered to help out on Friday with my my lapse in production assistant coverage. I don't actually have production assistants, generally speaking, but you know how I'm constantly calling out for, like, oh, if I had a production assistant handy, or some days I do, and say, I need you to look something up, or somebody figure out something, get me this article, and I don't actually have people to turn to for that. And Gil thought it might be a great idea, and I thought I might agree that it was a great idea, that if he were listening along with us, just as we pass notes sometimes silently through Skype between Greg and I, or Justice, although then I end up reading them aloud to you, maybe we could just do the same here. I don't know if anything's going to come up, but it's Friday. He had some time. He was going to be listening to the show anyway, so seems fine. Like a great idea. I don't know. I got to come up with something for us to look up. I guess I should have said over the break, get me that Jennifer Rubin article. But I've got it. So, okay, I would have done that if I had been thinking things through. And I don't know if I'm going to I don't know that I'll read all the way through it. I just wanted to sort of note that it happened. But it did remind me of something as I saw she's running with the picture of the World Central Kitchen vehicle, one of 3 that was targeted and destroyed by Israeli drones. And it's very interesting. This is a very fraught situation, obviously, but I kind of wanted to just comment that I know people have been saying this has to have been intentional. There was a Israeli military commander who said, came out and said, well, it was an accident. But then there was also, well, it was an accident, but also there's some indication that commanders on the ground in the IDF basically answer to no one and do whatever they want, which doesn't sound great either. Like, how do you run an army that way? That can't really be the truth, could it? And then, of course, people saying, well, how is it an accident? You systematically targeted 3 vehicles, one after the other. The story goes that the first vehicle was hit and people who survived that piled out of it and got into the other 2 cars, and then another one was hit, and then again whoever survived got in the 3rd car trying to escape and was hit again, and then everybody was killed. And you say, well, they systematically targeted them one by one. They were, it was said, coordinating their movements with the IDF as they were making them, which of course sounds like a pretty good idea and probably very necessary. And the vehicles were clearly marked with the World Central Kitchen logos on the roof, which is where, the position from which a drone would see them. Now, all of that being the case, everybody is obviously outraged. They were going to be outraged regardless. If they had been in unmarked cars, they would be outraged. But I don't know. So some of these things they're piling up and saying, well, it was systematic. It was hit one after the other. How dare you? And they were clearly marked. And now, okay, as it turns out, 2 of the 3 cars were clearly marked. The 3rd car was not marked at all, but okay. The excuse apparently is that they were fairly sure that a Hamas operative was with them. Why a Hamas operative would be with them, I don't know. But, of course, the Israelis are in the mode right now of thinking that there's Hamas operatives everywhere. And, it could even have been true. But apparently the person that they were thinking of, whether or not they were a Hamas operative, wasn't actually in the convoy anymore either. So that's problematic. But as to the other 2 cars being clearly marked, they are clearly marked. I can see that, there is, in fact, this logo on the roof. Although I'm wondering, from the sky through a drone camera, do you even know what that is? I mean, it's not like it doesn't say UN on the top, and it's not a red cross on the top. It's the World Central Kitchen logo. And do any of you, prior to having seen these pictures, know what the World Central Kitchen logo looks like? It doesn't, in any particular way scream out, no, civilian aid target, do not touch. I mean, you want a good target, a good thing to put on the roof of your car. Maybe, I don't know, what, like, don't shoot us in Hebrew. That might be something you put on the roof. But what else are you going to put there? I think it was a logical decision to put that on there. And that should have, at worst, they should have said, what the hell is that logo? Somebody find out for me what that logo is before I shoot it. But it's a war zone. So maybe not. But then the systematic destruction of, well, yeah, they think they're destroying a convoy that's got a Hamas operative in it. They're not going to just say, well, we should probably let everybody escape. I mean, from the perspective of we think that there are Hamas operatives in this convoy, you're going to want to shoot all the cars in the convoy. That doesn't seem particularly mysterious to me. And then, of course, if you've misidentified or have no idea what the logo is, the fact that you would then destroy all 3, even though 2 of them were marked with this logo that you don't know. Well, if you don't know what the logo is or don't care, yeah, you're going to destroy all 3 cars. And the fact that they destroyed all 3 cars in the convoy doesn't mean anything more to me than they're destroying one of the cars in the convoy. You're not supposed to shoot at that convoy. And the coordination is supposed to help you. But I say, I don't know, fog of war. It's just entirely possible that 2 things are possible, obviously. 1, that nobody knows, and 2, that nobody cares. Or something in between, I guess. And I don't know. I also had some questions about the World Central Kitchen. I know they have been all over the world offering humanitarian relief on the site of tremendous disasters. Do they have war zone experience? I mean, this does seem like a deployment that's different in kind. Gaza, active war zone, active bombing, active sniper activity, active drone activity, versus an earthquake somewhere, a fire somewhere, a refugee camp away from the fighting. But I don't know whether, I mean, maybe it wasn't a particularly good assumption that World Central Kitchen was a great fit, even though, I mean, food aid was what was most necessary, and that's their calling. I don't know how much active war zone experience they have, but maybe they're tremendous at it. They had body armor, so maybe they were fully prepared for it. I don't know. It just seems to me, though, like there's a lot of, when people have foregone conclusions about it, and it's hard not to have a foregone conclusion about a targeted attack on Western aid workers. I knew that would be a big deal. We all did. I think everybody figured that out pretty quickly. But, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't see any real reason to augment the outrage by saying, yeah, well, when they targeted the thing, they destroyed the whole thing. Yeah, that's what people will do. It was wrong from the start, but that's what people do. And now I understand there have been firings, like officers have been fired in the IDF over this decision making, which, I guess that was another question too. Like, what are you going to do about this, right? Like, they make this horrific either mistake or intentional attack, and everybody's furious. But I mean, is the answer, well, we shot those officers? I mean, you could. They're military. You could do that sort of thing, I guess. So, well, you fired them. Big deal. Those people are killed. They'll never... Yeah, I know. But I mean, the answer is not going to be, well, we hanged them or we shot them. That's not going to happen. Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense in the grand scheme of things. The Israeli bent on this stuff is just not going to be understandable to us. They're just operating under a different code than we are. And for many years, it was, when Israeli intelligence operations are running the targeting, they have the luxury in a non-war zone and a non-open war situation. They have the luxury of trying their best to mitigate civilian damages. They'll target who they think the bad guy is and occasionally tolerate collateral damage. But generally speaking, they'll go out of their way to call off a targeting operation if they think that the likelihood of damage to bystanders or family members is just too great. But when the IDF is doing it, when it's a military operation, they have a different threshold when it comes to collateral damage. And when it's an open warfare situation, they feel like they've got an even greater excuse. And Hamas, this is the government, essentially, of Gaza, and it's an enormous operation with enormous numbers of participants, and the design of which is to hide among the civilian population, or even be the civilian population. It's a militia in that sense, and it's going to always be difficult to tell the difference. And there'll be a vested interest, of course, in saying that anybody that was killed was civilian, whether they were or weren't. But at any rate, yes. It's quite a situation. As I was saying, as I was sort of faded off at the first break, the Passover celebrations in the next couple of days will be reminding everybody, as Jewish celebrants are reminding themselves, that in every age, as the story goes, some have risen against us to destroy us, but that God has saved us. And for ultra-nationalist and ultra-Orthodox Israelis, this has got to look like exactly the same thing, wouldn't you think? That once again, here we are in yet another age, and some have risen against us to destroy us, Hamas, and that is what they would like to do. And And then certainly October 7th had to have looked like that. It's the largest, deadliest pogrom in hundreds of years. And it happened in Israel. And they must have thought that the world will understand how we deliver retribution. And they probably would have for a week. But yes, after that, as the numbers got out and the methodologies became known, yeah, but I think they were probably caught by surprise. And as we said the other day, there's still widespread support for some kind of war effort. They absolutely do view this as justified, and they're probably super frustrated that the world doesn't understand. And yeah, there are weird things about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, and particularly as it pertains to Gaza, that the world may not understand, but hasn't been handled particularly well. Aid has always been difficult to get into Gaza, and part of that is because aid that's made its way into Gaza before has been waylaid by Hamas and repurposed for military use, essentially. Sending in, basic infrastructure like plumbing, piping, in order to build out the water delivery system there, or just for new construction use, has been, for years was being diverted by Hamas and turned into rockets. You send pipes to build a new apartment building, they steal the pipes and build rocket bodies out of them and launch them back at you. I mean, it's going to make people suspicious. Food aid, of course, also being waylaid by Hamas, and then when redistributed, you tell the Gazans this isn't food aid that came from the UN or was allowed in by Israel. This is stuff we procured for some reason or some way, and you should be thanking us for it. The Israelis are starving you. So, I don't know. There's some PR war going on. There's a great deal of suspicion going on. Some of it is justified. Of course, the horrible stories that preceded Gaza, and that happen every day in the West Bank as well, where people are shot approaching border crossings, and you say, how could an Israeli sniper shoot a woman with a baby, right? Horrible. Horrific. How could that even happen? And, I guess you forget along the way the stories of the Palestinian jihadists who have dressed as women carrying babies, but the baby turns out to be C4 explosives. And, well, don't shoot the woman with the baby. That's crazy. And then she shows up and she blows herself up and takes 11 Israeli soldiers. So, and that graduates into, well, sometimes it'll be women. They can see that this isn't a woman, and the sniper will shoot them. Well, this time we'll get a woman to do it, and she'll get even further. These things happen or get exaggerated as well among the IDF troops as well. And they tell themselves that they're constantly under siege and that they're constantly going to be tricked by the enemy. And combine that with any religious fervor or ultra-nationalist fervor, and you're not going to have humanitarian operators in the theater of war. It's really rather remarkable. And, of course, to this we have to say, does it happen on both sides? You bet. Okay. So, on the subject of Israel, and I guess we're stuck there for the day, even though I swear we're really going to get off of that and onto something else. I wanted to bring up to you, I mentioned yesterday that this story about the lavender AI story, the allegation that Israel was using this lavender AI system to, make its targeting selections in prosecuting this war, that they were allegedly relying on AI to tell them whether certain targets were Hamas or Hamas related, who the people were, where they were, what would be, what does an AI tell you? What would be a good place to strike? What would be a good target? Or does it tell you the likelihood that somebody you're looking at is or isn't Hamas? I don't know. But the allegation was there, probably better explained in the article. But I did want to point out, as Scott pointed out to me, that this should have been on our radar already. that this was already pointed out back when. Let me take a look at, is this it? I feel like that's not the one that he sent me, because this is from yesterday about something else. But I'm pretty sure that I got and then pocketed this thing. Is this it? Now I got to keep looking around until I find it. Yes. All right. So Scott sent me, he said, hey, I sent you this when it came out, and we didn't, I guess, get it onto the record, from December 14th, 2023. Jeff Brumfield, writing and recording for NPR News. Israel is using an AI system to find targets in Gaza. Experts say it's just the start. And apparently was operating under maybe a slightly different name at the time, but how about that? Just in terms of everybody's shocked yesterday. I can't believe they're using AI, and for many reasons. That was shocking, but apparently, we knew that. We knew that. People knew that, and they're standing around saying, how come you didn't listen when I told you? Yeah. So all the way back then, and, I don't know what name they were using for it then. There it is. Scott told me it was in here. The Israeli military says it's using artificial intelligence to select many of these targets in real time. The military claims its AI system named, this is bad news, really, generally speaking, named the Gospel, has helped it to rapidly identify enemy combatants and equipment while reducing civilian casualties. Well, it wasn't reducing any civilian casualties. And I guess at some point maybe they thought better of the idea of calling their AI targeting system the Gospel, or else they just replaced it with another one that's maybe even worse, that already bore the name Lavender, or whether they, memo, note to self, don't call your killing machine the Gospel. That would have been a good idea. But yes, I won't read through this article, but I'll provide it to you. And thanks to Scott for providing it to me the other day. And the reminder that, this should have been, we would have looked like we really knew what we were talking about if I had read the thing that he sent me back in December. So how do you like that? Okay. Let's see. It's time to switch subjects. God. It was long ago, time to switch subjects. So yesterday, there was this thing in the courts in New York. Yesterday was ostensibly the 10 calendar day deadline for Trump to file his appeal bond in the New York fraud case, the one presided over by Judge Engeron. And you know all the background details. Giant judgment against him, plus interest, meant $450 million. Had to put up a bond if he wanted to appeal. Appealed the size of the bond, got it reduced to $175, and then was given 10 days to come up with the $175 million. And yesterday was the end of the 10th day. But this is real. Just the whole story is just so fascinating. So in the days leading up to yesterday's deadline, I guess all you can say is it was reported that Trump had found a way to come up with the bond. And even, just out of habit, basically, I said, well, Trump and paperwork, man, you can't be sure with this guy. Are you positive? And I just kind of called out just at random, because this is a good rule of thumb. Are you sure? Have you checked the paperwork? Have you checked every single thing? We did spend an enormous amount of time on this yesterday, but there were further developments. But when we left off, we had found that, I don't know, what did we get to by the end of the day, or the end of the broadcast day yesterday? But we were pretty sure there was something really wrong with I don't know, by 11 o'clock, were we sure that there was something wrong with it, or were we just sort of suspicious? But by the end of the day yesterday, what developed yesterday was somebody did, in fact, start taking a look there. Oh, yes, we did report that the court had bounced the bond back and said, you've made some paperwork mistakes. You've got to correct and resubmit. But as it turns out, the paperwork mistakes were only the start of it. There were some much more fundamental problems with this thing. And as we began to see both what the court was pinpointing as being wrong with the paperwork and the Trump and Knight Insurance responses to it, it became clear that there were bigger problems. So I like say, long story short, I guess here we say, the court said, yeah, you didn't fill out the paperwork right. We need to have the attorney of record for the Knight Insurance Company. The Knight Insurance Company has got to file a financial disclosure form, a financial statement, essentially. Layman's terms, okay, Knight Insurance says it's putting up a $175 million bond to secure the judgment against Trump. And everybody understands the mechanics of this. The court finds Trump liable, the Trump organization liable. $450 million is supposed to be paid to New York State. In order to continue with an appeal, you got to put up a large chunk of money to guarantee that New York State will start getting paid on that money if you lose the appeal or if you abscond, if you decide to disappear and not even pursue, whatever happens. There's going to be a guarantee that New York is going to start getting that money. I don't know what the reasoning was necessarily if you owe $450 million, why the bond only has to be $175 million, but that was what the Court of Appeals decided. So, okay, fine. Working with that, $175 million has to be put up. You can put up a bond. That's the preferred way of doing it. And in order to do that, you have to you got to get somebody who will say, this third party, in this case, Knight Insurance, will pay the state of New York $175 million if something goes wrong. Trump loses the appeal, Trump absconds to Russia, what have you, and there's a default judgment against him. You'll get your $175 million. I guarantee it. Hi, it's me, Don Hankey, and Knight Insurance. Now, why would Knight Insurance agree to do something like that? Or in the ordinary course of things, the bonding company would say, I'm not just paying $175 million out of the kindness of my heart. The way I'm going to do this is you're going to give me, you, Trump, will give me, Knight Insurance, $175 million in any form you want to put it that I think is liquid enough. Cash, if you've got it, stocks, bonds, convertible securities, what have you, property. Anything that I'm willing to take to cover the $175 million. Plus, I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. There's a fee. How much is the fee? Negotiable. We don't know. So, $175 million plus a fee. Give it to me, and I will collect it all. You can bring it to me in 17 different forms. If I'm willing to accept it, I'll consolidate it all into a form of one bond so that the New York State, the plaintiff here says, I'm satisfied, I'm going to get it. Because if you bring me your penny jar and some stocks and maybe some real estate deeds or whatever, I don't know if I'm going to get my 175 out of this. But with a bond, I know. So what ends up happening is they file this thing with the New York State courts, and the New York State courts say, all well and good. I have here a paper that says that Knight Insurance will pay $175 million to the courts. As a matter of routine, we need you to submit a financial statement that we can examine and, assure ourselves that you have $175 million in cash or readily convertible securities that we can rely on. Do ya? And they filed some paperwork that indeed showed that they did not. Now, they might have it, but the paperwork they filed didn't evidence it. It was a financial statement for the Knight Insurance entity, and there are several, just like everybody else in the world. They have 15 different LLCs that all say Knight Insurance this, Knight Insurance that. But the entity that was issuing the bond is the one they're concerned with. Do you have $175 million or more in cash such that we can think it realistic that we can collect? That's what this whole bond business is about. And as it turns out, on April 1st, along with the rest of its filings, they sent along a financial statement saying this is our financial statement as of December 31st, 2023. Here's our numbers. And it all looks like a financial disclosure statement. But when you read it, you say, wait a minute, you don't have the money. What the hell's going on here? That's why they said, no, bounced, among other things. Please come back to us with a financial statement that shows that you have $175 million ready to give us. And they did come back. And then once again, reporters were saying, well, it's been corrected now. Just for the record, those of you, who wanted to know, it's been corrected. Well, was it corrected? I ask you. Check the paperwork. Well, guess what? They checked the paperwork, and there's a problem with the second round of paperwork. A different night insurance entity said, well, we've got the money. Yeah, well, I'm asking you if the one that's giving me the bond has the money. Now, you could argue, perhaps, and be able to convince a judge, these two companies are so closely related and run by the same people and have the same board of directors. They intend to and will transfer the $175 million that Company B has to Company A to cover the bond that Company A is issuing. Okay, but you will be asked in court, why didn't you do that already? Or why don't you do that now? Why do you tell me I have another company that has the money? Give that company the money if it's so easy. And second of all, I would ask you this. It's a weird thing. On your financial disclosure or financial statement that you provided to back up the Company A that's issuing the bond, you said among your assets, on April 3rd, you sent us this other thing that says you have plenty of assets, including, well, hold on a second. I'll just say, also kind of weird that you say you've got $175 million. Then you give us a financial statement that says you don't. And then you say, but this other company that we also run does. How is it that it's on April 3rd? You realize, oh, the bulk of my assets that I'm using to back this bond up, I do have them. I forgot about them on April 1st. But I remembered on April 3rd that I have these things. So that prompted a renewed look at what was in this April 3rd financial statement. And the financial statement there included a promissory note, essentially, a note that was valued at $185 million. And there's no information about whose note is this and how firm is it and how old is it and what's it backed by, et cetera, et cetera. And now the theory is, well, gee whiz, that's about the amount, $175 million for the bond, plus the fee of about $10 million that you might expect for such a thing added on top. And is this an IOU from Trump for his own bond, and you're using that as an asset? No way. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, I'm getting some interesting information. I think I did find out from some others who were monitoring the show live, but Gil's letting me know about the... This is an interesting thing about the mechanics of the way the show works, of course, especially with the breaks. But my operating information is that at 2 seconds after the break, in other words, if the break is supposed to happen as this most immediately previous one does, at 9:59, that I have until 9:59 and 2 seconds, basically, to have anything get heard before there's a hard cutoff of what I'm saying and the break plays. Now, mind you, that the exit music that I usually play in the background, this music here, this stuff that I'm playing, okay, there's not a break happening, don't worry about it. But when I'm playing this, and this doesn't trigger a break just by my hitting the button, the breaks are controlled on Justice's end from the Netroots Radio World Headquarters on the West Coast. And they're timed, and they happen at the same time each day. You can switch them off, and occasionally they do that when circumstances warrant. But the deal is that I'm supposed to absolutely, positively be done with what I'm saying by 2 seconds after the minute that the break happens. But what I think is actually happening is I'm playing my outro music, etc., etc. And then at 2 seconds after the minute, there's the hard cutoff, but I guess Netroots Radio is fading in. That's the only terminology I can use for it. And I think so it's unfade, but it's fading in its own music for the break. that I guess maybe competes with and overlaps the music that I actually play here, the familiar stuff that you hear at the start, that big thump. And then when I hit that on my own soundboard to create the cue for myself and anybody who's on with me that we're going into break. Anyway, and then I think also along with the music being played on the Netroots radio side, my audio fades down. And anyway, it ends up such that you can't hear that last second of me trying to sneak something in, which is often me blurting out the most important thing. On the podcast, it comes out differently because that's produced entirely here and there's no overlapping music or cutoff on the Netroots radio side. The live show has that disadvantage. So I guess really what I need to do is to train myself to be wrapped up by the minute and just let the 2 seconds go unused, because they're effectively unused anyway. You don't get to hear what I'm about to tell you. So anyway, with that out of the way, it's an interesting education and all of this stuff. And it's amazing. I mean, you guys hear this stuff. I don't hear what the live show sounds like. There's no way for me to do it. Somebody could record it, I guess, and then play it for me, but I'm not going to listen to myself for 2 hours. Are you crazy? Anyway, we were explaining what happened yesterday with Trump's bond, and it looked for all the world in the second supposedly clarifying filing from the different Knight insurance entity that they were holding on to among their assets. The reason this is the proof to the court, the proof that they offered the court that they had enough money to cover the bond, was that among their assets, they had other assets too. I mean, they could have covered it. They didn't need this, really, I don't think, to cover it. But maybe, I don't know. I didn't do the math on it. But they included among their assets a note from an unknown source that happened to be worth about what you would expect a deposit from Trump to be valued at if he were trying to buy a $175 million bond. Ordinarily, you have to turn over this cash or whatever other instruments you have to them, plus the fee, and then they will spit out a $175 million bond to the court on the other end. But here, for whatever reason, they were saying we have an unknown IOU, not cash from anybody, but an IOU that happens to be in the amount that you would expect would be required of Donald Trump in exchange for a $175 million bond. Now, problems with that theory. Maybe problems for us, maybe problems for them, but the second filing likewise said that even this other entity's financial statement was their December 31st year-end financial statement. Now, at first that argues against the idea that $185 million note is from Trump, because why would Trump have given a $185 million IOU to Knight Insurance prior to December 31st? It doesn't, he's only just now supposedly initiating this financial relationship that will yield him the bond. And on December 31st, he had no idea that the bond that he would need would be $175 million either. If there had been, I don't even remember when the verdict came down, but I don't think it was before December 31st. But even if it was $454 million that he would have to come up with the bond. That's the IOU he would have sent to Knight if he already knew. But he didn't. So you might think, well, that can't be it then. It must just be that they have a promissory note from some other random person who just, for whatever reason, owes them $185 million, and they took the note instead of the $185 million. I don't know why they did that. Or, this is Trump we're talking about, or they did, in fact, just recently get a note from him worth supposedly worth $185 million. I'll pay you $185 million at some point. I'm good for it. I'm very, very rich. And they said, okay, fine. We'll add that to our assets. That only helps our bottom line. But why they would include that on a financial statement dated December 31st, I do not know. And if that is, in fact, a April or thereabouts timed IOU, it does not belong on a December 31st financial statement. It didn't exist as of December 31st. So putting it on your December 31st financial statement would be problematic, fraudulent. Yes. Is it just a mistake? Did they really mean, oh, no. I said it was our December 31st filing because I sent you from the other entity. I sent you the December 31st filing. This is our March 31st end of first quarter statement. Oh, that would actually be plausible. And it would in fact be possible that in the closing days of March and the early days of April, when he was already under deadline, Trump did in fact speak with Knight and send them $185 million IOU. And by the way, that doesn't make any particular sense, because ordinarily you say, well, I don't want the IOU, I want the cash. That's the point. That's what bonding is. I don't want your IOU. But it actually does comport with what the attorney for Knight said, that for some reason, and I guess you can make that decision, it's a bad business decision, but you can make it. For some reason, they opted to allow Trump to retain the physical possession of the cash that he says would back his promissory note. No, bad business decision when you're dealing with anybody, really, but especially with Trump. If you really have $185 million in cash or other liquid assets, you're going to have to give it to us in order for me to issue the bond. It's extraordinarily strange for you to say, why don't you hold on to the cash while I simply assume $175 million worth of liability for you? I don't know why you would do that, but there are Trump superfans who would be that crazy. But then there's the accounting weirdness of, I'm going to count this among my assets and value it at $185 million. What is this thing? It's the promissory note from someone who's just been found liable for $450 million in fraud. Well, I don't know if it's really worth $185. That's the number on it. Yeah, he owes you $185 million, but he owes them $450 million, and he doesn't have that. So I don't know. Oh, okay. Gil, by the way, says, I think I used the British pronunciation. I'm secretly British, by the way. I don't know if I told you all that. The British pronunciation of promissory note, I guess is how we would say it here in the United States. But when, first of all, I spell check with a Q. I don't. But I don't know. It's weird. There's a couple of odd British pronunciations that have snuck in. And I wonder if it's a product of law school. Did my professors say promissory note? Possibly. You know, I mean, our law descends from English common law. Maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe I had British professors and I don't remember it. I don't know. What's the other one I knew? Adversarial, or adversaries or adversaries. But I don't even know if, I think even British people disavow that pronunciation. Okay. Side note on the show. Interesting. Okay. Well, at any rate, this was a weird development. Now, by the way, there's another problem with the filing from Knight. One, of course, the entity that says it has the money, but by the way says it doesn't have the money. I know that's an odd way of saying it. I voted for it before I voted against it. I had the money, but I don't have the money. The entity that says it has sufficient assets to cover $175 million bond is not the entity that's issuing the bond, but whatever, something, they could be closely enough related. But in addition to that, there's two problems. Well, one, of course, the entity that says it has enough money to cover the bond doesn't have the cash from Trump, but might have other assets worth $175 million. But there's a second problem, and this is the one that Tish James, the Attorney General of New York, is focusing on, which is that in New York, in order to be allowed to validly issue such a bond, not only do you have to show that you have the money and are willing to sign documents taking on liability for the defendant's debt should the defendant either lose the appeal or otherwise abscond. You have to be licensed to do that sort of business in New York. If you're an insurance company and you're putting up the bond, yes, I understand that insurance companies frequently do put up bonds. But you're a California company. Are you licensed to do business of any kind? Especially this kind, but any kind, in New York? And the answer is, for all intents and purposes, no. And when I say all intents and purposes, of course things get complicated. There are certain types of insurance that a California company could issue in New York without specific additional licensure, but this is not one of them. So we're only concerned with this kind. Are you licensed to do this in New York? No. Could you get licensed in New York to do this? Maybe. Could you get licensed in time to meet this deadline? Well, now, no, because the original deadline, well, not even the original. The original deadline was a while ago. The new deadline was the appeals court, when they reduced the bond from $450 to $175, said you have 10 days to come up with the $175. The 10 days have now come and gone. Could they get a greater extension? Could they get another extension to firm up their financial statements? Maybe. To try to seek licensure in New York State. Well, that could take a while. I don't know how long it would take to turn that around. I assume that's a process. Well, in all of this, Tish James takes notice of this and says, you're not licensed. This is not a facially valid bond. In other words, Trump not only screwed up the paperwork on this thing twice, but also Knight was never authorized to even author this bond in the first place. So, not really authorized to give this bond, didn't have sufficient funds to back the bond. This is all possibly, I guess you'd have some work ahead of you to try to prove that it was fraudulent as opposed to just a stupid mistake that nobody in their right mind should ever have made. And so maybe basically, therefore, eventually you could convince a jury, yeah, it was just fraud from the start. Mind you, this is to cover a bond of appeal in a fraud case. That's not a good look, as Mario might say. I don't know how I got to be Italian on that one. And I don't mean Mario Cuomo either. I don't know. There was just a mistake. I get an extra A in there, and I decided to then turn it into an Italian thing. It's not a good look. You can't be committing fraud in the bond for your fraud case. Not great. Is it fraud? I don't know. Do I suspect it's fraud? I will tell you that yesterday my suspicion was it would not be beyond Donald Trump to say, with the deadline coming up yesterday, oh my God, I'm running out of time. Can I get a bond? Can I get a bond from an insurance company? An insurance company comes through. Amazing. In California, they say they'll issue the bond. They're a big Trump fan. Okay, fine. Let's do it. But I have a problem. I'm not licensed to do this in New York, and I don't have those assets. You're going to have to send me assets to back the bond. And Trump, of course, is, I got news for you. I'm not sending you the assets. But I want you to issue the bond anyway because you're a big Trump fan. And maybe their lawyer says, you know what? I mean, we'll do it, but I don't think it's going to work. I'm just wondering whether Trump at some point says, I'll tell you what, let's file the partial paperwork and see what happens. Right? We'll file the paperwork. We'll send it to the court. The court's probably going to say, wait a minute, this is incomplete. But here's what I'm thinking. They're going to say it's incomplete and you got to fill it out because everybody knows, an insurance company's it's just a simple mistake. They're going to know how to fill it out. They'll send it back. We'll fill it out and we'll tell them, yes, we'll get it back to you before the deadline. And then we just don't. And then we see what happens. I'm wondering whether Trump planned from the beginning, let's just file half the paperwork and then ask for another extension. And if they don't give it, they don't get, I don't know. We'll appeal some other thing. If they don't give it, we'll appeal it. You should have given us the extension. We'll take it all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to. The court in New York erred in not allowing us the opportunity to correct the 50th mistake in our paperwork. I mean, here's the question. Did they approach the paperwork for this bond the way Jared Kushner approached the paperwork for his financial disclosure forms? Oh, I keep making mistakes. Oh, you keep catching me. Oh, I made another mistake. Oh, I forgot about that one now that you caught me. Oh, and he kept getting extension after extension after extension on filing revision after revision after revision. It's not beyond Trump to say, I don't have $175 million, and I'm not going to get $175 million, and if I do, I'm not going to give it to you. Whether it's New York or Knight Insurance, I'm going to be holding on to it. Instead, I'm going to file something that's going to cause problems. Oh no, delays in the case. Can't believe it. What a terrible thing to happen. And here I wanted this whole thing resolved as soon as possible. Of course not. How long does it delay the case? Not that long. Could he get more delays? He could. As a matter of fact, Tish James filed yesterday saying, by the way, this whole thing is facially insufficient. These guys aren't licensed to practice this, to do this in New York, to issue this sort of bond, to do business in New York. But her motion, very generously, I might add, actually suggests, she gives a suggested motion to the court. Here's what I would like to see the court rule. And she says, we should give them 10 more days to fix this thing, either to become licensed in New York or to prove that they already are, but also firm up the deal with this $185 million they're holding. What's the story with all this? We want further inquiry into the nature of their assets, and we want them to establish that they're licensed to do this in New York. And she says, being very reasonable, why don't we give them 10 more days to do it? So I think the deadline will likely be extended. The court will probably agree to that, although the court could say you're right as to necessity of proof of their licensure in New York, but we're not going to agree to the second part of your motion to give them another 10 days. But we would have heard about that by now. So it's all rather tangled up, and there's very good explainers out there, and I pocketed some of them. Here's the New York Times discussion of the situation. New York Attorney General questions Trump's $175 million bond deal. Tish James said in court papers that the California company providing the guarantee was not qualified to do such deals in New York. I've told you as much. Here, this article, Ben Protis and Matthew Haag, I don't know how he pronounces Haag, tell you pretty much the same thing. And so I won't bother reading you their explanation of it. Mine was much more fun. I winged it off the top of my head. There's another similar report just to sort of tell you what we're looking at here and what we've got in front of us. There is the Business Insider report. This one by Laura Italiano, who does not speak like this, I am sure, but I'm going to do it anyway. Wouldn't that be funny to read the whole article that way? Well, probably not. It would drive my family up the wall. You might enjoy it, but this goes on 24/7 at my house. New York uses obscure civil practice law to demand a closer look at Trump's $175 million appeal bond and its underwriter, Knight Specialty Insurance. Remember that name? Anyway, this one might be a little bit more interesting, just to see what they think is so obscure about this civil practice law of saying, you say you have enough money to back this bond. Can you prove it? No. Well, that's an obscure law. No, I don't know. But they might cite us to the actual sections of the code, as Tish James did in her filing, too, by the way. We could just read the filing to give you the section numbers of the law she's citing. I don't think that's necessary, but Business Insider always does things pretty quick and clean. Let's see how they do here. The LA company, these are the bullet points right underneath their title, the way they do subheaders. Bullet points, the fast stuff you need to know. The LA company that underwrote Trump's $175 million appeal bond needs major vetting. New York says major vetting. Officials want the company to prove its financial soundness and show the underlying collateral. That makes perfect sense. Judge Engeron, who presided over Trump's civil fraud trial, gets the final say over the bond. It'll be back to him on, did they Is the $175 million bond sufficient? Well, he has to accept the amount. That's what the court above him has ruled. But have they shown that they have proven, to at least a reasonable degree that they actually could come up with this money? The whole thing is supposed to be a guarantee of $175 million in cash, or as close to cash as you can get, on the spot if everything goes to hell. The New York Attorney General's office wants a closer look at Donald Trump's $175 million appeal bond. In a 2-page court filing on Thursday, and that's where we could probably get all the nitty-gritty details, state officials are giving Trump or his underwriters, the Knight Specialty Insurance Company, 10 days to justify or prove the sufficiency of that bond. Justify is, I guess, the term of art here. The step is necessary, the state notes in its filing, because the LA-based Knight company is a non-admitted carrier under state insurance law, meaning it is not automatically qualified to provide bonds in New York. Admitted insurance carriers, it's not that you confess that you're an insurance carrier. That's not what they mean by admitted. It means like being admitted to the bar, admitted to work in the state. Admitted insurance carriers are certified by New York's Department of Financial Services as qualified to underwrite bonds. Because of Knight's non-admitted status, Attorney General Tish James is allowed under New York's civil practice rules to ask for proof that Knight is financially sound and that the bond's collateral is sufficient. The final call on whether the Knight bond sinks or swims will be up to New York Supreme Court Justice Arthur Engoron, who has set April 22nd for a hearing on the matter. So that's the official extension of deadline there. So that's quite a while. Let's see. That's if now's the 5th, so 15, 17, as of yesterday, it was 18 more days to work it all out before the judge sits down and tries to decide whether or not this thing is going to work. Okay. So let's see. Engoron, who is the judge who presided over Trump's civil trial, finding in February, of course, that he was the background, $450 million worth of liability. Trump needs the bond in order to keep the winner of the lawsuit, New York State, from seizing his properties while he appeals Engoron's judgment, which by Thursday has risen to more than $469 million. That interest just keeps piling up, according to a penalty calculator maintained by the Associated Press. There's a link to that, too. The Los Angeles-based Knight is owned by billionaire Don Henke, described as Forbes as the king of subprime car loans. I can't believe fraudulent paperwork underwrites this whole thing from the king of subprime anything loans. The company did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Because large appeal bonds are almost always underwritten by admitted insurance carriers, the need for Knight to justify, and that is, again, the term of art, meaning show me that you have enough money to cover this, to justify their bonds underwriting and collateral is an unusual extra step. I see what you mean. So I guess they're trying to turn this into, well, this is so obscure, except it's not obscure. It's what they require of every bond issuer. It's just that ones that are admitted to this practice in New York have already done all the paperwork with the New York Department of Financial Services or whatever it's called, such that if you're licensed, we assume everything is on the up and up, because every, year or whatever you have to renew and show how much you have and give us a financial disclosure and tell us what your assets are and be licensed. And if you're not, then you have to go through the whole procedure ad hoc. That's the unusual part. It's unusual, as they say here. What do they say? It is an unusual extra step. It's not an extra step. It's a step that everybody goes through in order to be licensed in New York. So I don't know. I think that's an odd formulation of it. Anyway, justifying was not necessary, as it says, though, when Trump used insurance giant Chubb to post a $92 million bond last month for E. Jean Carroll's defamation, the defamation appeal of E. Jean Carroll's case there. He's the one, of course, appealing. Why was that not necessary, though? Probably because Trump is admitted in New York. This time around, though, shopping for a bond has been harder. Before getting his bond through night, Trump had complained through his civil fraud defense lawyers that about 30 surety companies through 4 separate brokers had turned him down the second time, including Chubb. So, no wonder he was having such difficulty. Okay, pretty soon our music is coming up, and we'll try to cut out a little earlier so you don't miss anything here. Despite the temporary delay, things could have gone far worse for Trump. On March 25th, an appeals court in Manhattan allowed him to post only $175 million. Oh, I'm late on the music. That'll make things worse. Anyway, without that lifeline, Trump would have had to have paid $500 million in cash to purchase a bond covering the full amount that he owes. Luckily, he got it reduced to $175. Okay, so that's where we stand. All right, we'll check back in on other developments in this. I don't know. I guess I'll just wrap it up now so that you don't miss anything. What do? Just hum until the music ends? All right.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm all jumbled about this. So I just got another note from Gil that tells me that people are chatting, certainly on, I just took a look at some social media here too, earthquake that shook the corridor, shook the Amtrak corridor, I guess, essentially, felt in Philadelphia, and people reporting having felt it in New York and Connecticut as well. Didn't reach down here. At least not that I noticed. And I've experienced a total of 1 earthquake here in the Virginia area. And it was kind of unmistakable, although I didn't know exactly what was going on at the beginning of it. By, 15 seconds into it, I was like, hey, this isn't a truck hitting the house. This is something completely different. So anyway, how's that for breaking news? Meanwhile, one of my usual, as the euphemism goes, production assistants, who's often here on Fridays and is on her way back from Philly just now. So I wonder whether that's was strong enough to have been felt in the car. Interesting. Man, all right, well, I'll check in. I did get a text from her. I mean, I'm sure everything's fine. I'm sure it was a fairly mild earthquake, a lot of building shaking, et cetera, et cetera. But at any rate, yeah, no word on that. And the text, I wonder what it would be like in a car driving along. It might not be felt the same way as it would be in a stable structure. But we'll check in and see if we have information for you either later in the show or, oh, by the way, we have some housekeeping issues. Monday would be the normal return of the show at the end of the weekend. And another good opportunity to test Greg Dworkin's voice as he returns to the show. But I have this to say: is Monday's the eclipse day, right? And even though we won't be in the path of totality, and maybe it will even be cloudy, and 90% isn't the same thing as totality, but I think we can reach a 90% band pretty easily. There's some plans afoot for us to go and view the eclipse somewhat to our south, but maybe to make our way to Wallops Island, where there will be some rocket launches. There's a NASA facility there, and some rocket launches having to do with the eclipse, but I understand they'll be launching some, I guess, observational rockets at the beginning and then at the peak and then at the end of the eclipse. So it might make it worth doing, even if it's a cloudy day, to also see the rocket launches. On the other hand, if it's cloudy, the rocket launches won't be so spectacular too. We'll have to check the weather. Plus, of course, it would mean being away from the microphone. But I mean, for an eclipse and rocket launches, I think you can all understand. Although, by the way, if you look directly out my front door, or rather, the front door of Kagro in the Morning World headquarters, okay, makes it sound, it's a more grandiose sounding situation. But I have seen rocket launches from Wallops Island, like directly out my front door. It depends kind of what direction they're going. But I guess we must be just due west of the rocket path. I have definitely seen rocket plumes, which, by the way, is a little bit disconcerting if you live in the Washington, D.C. area and, Trump is president and I'm going to nuke a hurricane by Greenland, or maybe nuke Greenland. I don't know. Seeing rocket plumes is disconcerting, unless, of course, you know what the hell's going on ahead of time. Although, we're just testing some rockets. Now I know what's going on ahead of time. But is it true? Anyway, back to the story that I had been ranting on before. This is going to be a hell of a thing for Scott to try to summarize, by the way. But I wanted to share with you, I think I've got someplace here in pocket, another social media denizen's very helpful legalistic explanation of what's going on. The Blue Sky account of Too Big to Fail, which you can find, of course, at toobigtofail.bsky, bluesky.social, began explaining things yesterday. There's a little bit more detail in all of this, but she, I don't know if we have an identification here or not, begins by saying, okay, let's dig into this bond issue in the Trump appeal to see whether Tish James might actually finally be able to start seizing assets tomorrow. This was, of course, at about 12:10 p.m. yesterday, immediately post-show and before the latest developments in terms of filings for extensions. Tish James was offering 10 days, and then eventually Engoron said, well, we'll have a hearing as to what to do on April 22nd, after which we might then give him another 10 days to file a bond or make one more attempt at it. Anyway, it says she is looking at the site of that the courts maintain, saying, I have no idea if this link will work, but this is actually the copy of the bond on file with the first department, that is, I guess, the division of the Supreme Court where Engoron is sitting. For some background on the operative statutes, here we are, CPLR, and I don't even know offhand what that stands for, but let's see if we can figure it out. That's the New York Civil Practice Law and Rules is the answer. So according to the New York Civil Practice Law and Rules, I got to find the correct window here again. CPLR section 5519 allows for a stay of enforcement of a money judgment on appeal when an undertaking in that sum is given. In other words, you put up a bond, right? So 5519 is the section that says if you put up a bond, we will stay enforcement of the money judgment against you pending appeal. CPLR 2501 defines undertaking as an obligation which contains a covenant by a surety to pay the required amount. In other words, the definition of a bond. CPLR 2502 defines surety as 1, an insurance company authorized to execute the undertaking within the state, or 2, a natural person who shall execute with the undertaking his affidavit setting forth that he is domiciled within the state and worth at least the amount specified. Well, none of the people helping Trump with this bond are New York domiciliaries. Is that what you say? Domiciled in New York. domiciliaries. Is that, ooh, I don't think I've ever had to pronounce that one out loud. And none of them are pledging their own individual money, so 2 is out of the window, leaving 1. That is the insurance company authorized to execute an undertaking within the state. Now, Knight Insurance Company is not an insurance company authorized to execute the undertaking within the state. For starters, taking the bond at face value, Knight has on hand surplus cash assets of $138,441,671, notably less than the $175 million that they issued the bond for, meaning they can't actually pay the bond if Trump loses, meaning that even if a court were inclined to accept the deficient bond, it can't. Knight is claiming that it's authorized to issue the bond as a surplus lines insurer. Right? One of the kinds of insurance that they can issue in New York without being specifically licensed for that. But surplus lines insurance, which can be sold by unlicensed and even foreign insurers in New York, notably does not comply with CPLR's Section 2502's requirements. So whether Knight can sell surplus lines is irrelevant. It very specifically says in order to issue an appeals bond, you've got to be licensed in New York. Additionally, the language in the bond is completely wrong. That's another one of those things. Check the paperwork, as I always say. I'm so proud of myself for reminding everybody that you have to check every aspect of Trump's paperwork. It has words on it. It's organized to look like a bond, set of bond paperwork, but the bond is completely wrong. Knight claims to, quote, undertake that if the judgment is upheld in whole or in part, defendants, that is Trump and the Trump organization, will pay $175 million to the state of New York. That is not how this works. Or in other words,
that is not how this works!
That is correct, screamy lady. I have to find out the name of the actress who does that. But it's not a bond to say, well, if the defendant loses the appeal or absconds or what have you, he'll pay the $175 million. Well, then, pardon me, but what the F are you doing in front of me? Who gives a crap about Knight Insurance from Los Angeles, California? Why are you here? If you're here to tell me he's going to pay, I don't need you for that. He's supposed to pay. I mean, they just worded it wrong, which leads you to question things like, is the lawyer who says that he's the attorney of record or the attorney in fact for Knight Insurance who's filing all of this stuff actually an attorney? Or does he know anything about doing anything, ever, anywhere, especially in New York? And apparently not. It's just, golly, that's terrible. But here's some questions and answers from people observing this thread, by the way. Was the link the attempt to cure the issue? Okay, was the thing that you were showing us, and it's not entirely clear, I think, even to the original poster, that you were going to be able to follow the links. New York lawyers have access to this. Not everybody else does. But from the question here, from a practical perspective, is he actually in default at midnight, barring a new ruling or order, rather, from the court? I assume that means that the requirement would revert to $500 million. I don't think that's the case, but Too Big to Fail says the link is his attempt to cure the issues. That is to say, the link I provided to you is Knight's attempt at refiling. But yes, by including the financials of the insurance company and its parent, that didn't actually cure the deficiencies, though, and he's not actually in default of anything. It's just that the enforcement stay was conditioned on him posting a bond, and he hasn't done that. Okay, that makes some sense. I thought that was interesting to have the citations to code in case you have any worries about our interpretation of things. The things that are still not established, I should warn you about this, right? It's still only speculation that, one, the $185 million promissory note that Knight's parent or related company says it's holding, it's speculation that it's actually Trump's. But they've done nothing to dissuade us in 24 hours since then that is Trump's. Two, they haven't yet explained what it's doing on a December 31st financial disclosure. It could just be a mistake. Three, It could be a totally different note that has nothing to do with Trump. It just happens that somebody else owes them $185 million and they both think that an IOU is sufficient for that. But regardless of all of that, whether or not that $185 million note is Trump's or not, they're not licensed to issue bonds of this type in New York, and they're going to have to fix it. And for whatever reason, we have to wait until April 22nd for the parties to show up in front of Judge Engoron and explain themselves and argue either for more time or why the court ought to accept a bond from somebody that isn't licensed in New York, even though that's not within their power. It's a really interesting and complicated mess. This is just what Trump does. I suspect that this is just him saying, I know this is crazy. I know this doesn't hold water. I know I'll lose eventually. But is there any way that we can use this to kick the can down the road? Eventually I'll lose. Let's promise to come up with something else. Ask for a reasonable amount of time. What if we screw up that one too? What if we forget to sign something or the notary's commission has expired and somebody notices it? Well, then what? They're not going to shoot us. They're going to ask us to refile. And here's the big question. Can you kick the can down the road enough times that you finally beat the 6-month prohibition time against my selling any of my new IPO Trump media stocks so that I can grab that windfall and use that money to pay the bond? That's a long way to kick the can. But look at what's happening. Every time he, quote unquote, screws something up, he gets another 10 days. The judge says, I'll give you even longer than that before we have a hearing. On April 22nd, they'll have a hearing. They'll plead their case. They'll say, gee whiz, we need time to fix it. He'll give them 10 days. What if they accidentally screw it up again? I don't know. At some point, somebody's got to say, too many chances. I'm going to hit you over the head with the hammer. But that's just not the way we do things in this exceptional country. Okay, a couple of other items I wanted to bring up here. One, here, I forgot to bring this one up, but you already have this information, basically. I just wanted to point out, and I'll put it in the roundup. The CBS News was one of the first ones out of the box yesterday with a written report about this at 4 p.m. Is Trump's $175 million civil fraud bond valid in New York? Answer, no. But it was interesting to see on the record, backing up the weird speculation. And of course, as I said, the original backstop of don't believe it. Trump wrote it on paper. It's not true. But it does lead you to other baseless but fun speculation about, well, the nature of dealing with Trump on anything. I mean, how many times have I said it this way? I know it sounds crazy, but I don't know what to tell you. The guy has forged electoral college certificates. He twice in one day yesterday, essentially, well, twice in this week, he effed up and basically filed fraudulent papers for an appeal bond in his fraud case. And can I remind you that at the heart of the Florida documents case, where he is on trial on Espionage Act violations, the heart of that case is that he's effed up the paperwork again. How much paperwork that is supposedly extremely important did Trump F up while he was president, but we just never bothered to ask? Well, we bothered to ask, but no officialdom ever bothered to ask, and nobody bothered to double check. And how much of it would they, in a court in the end, if they're just going to deem it, well, there's nothing we can do now, does it make any difference? But if it doesn't make any difference, why do we have paperwork at all? I mean, here's what I'm getting at, right? I always love to fantasize. Did Trump actually appoint those 3 conservative justices to the Supreme Court? There's paperwork involved in that. What would the court likely say about that? Well, he probably did. Supposing he screwed up somehow, he screwed up the paperwork. I don't know how. And we usually don't check into what paperwork? You nominate the Senate confirms, that's all there is to it. Yeah, well, normally, when normal things happen. But ordinarily, the Senate, for instance, won't be taking up a nomination unless certain papers arrive at their chamber, properly signed and all that stuff. And it's usually assumed that that stuff is done correctly because there's people dedicated to doing it correctly. In the Trump administration, there's no people, there's no dedication. And if there's anything, there's a dedication to doing it wrong, almost on purpose. Do we know that that happened? No, we don't. Do we usually assume that it doesn't happen in every other administration? Yes, we do. Should we assume that it happened that way in the Trump administration? Ordinarily, you might say yes, but the answer on the record, from past experiences, no. Please double check. Now, does it matter? Well, in all likelihood, right, the courts would say, well, once the Senate confirms them, the fact that the paperwork is deficient doesn't matter. But I'm thinking differently. I'm thinking about, for instance, well, does everybody remember that in 2009, they made Barack Obama, or maybe he opted to, but essentially what happened was he had to take the oath of office all over again after his first inauguration. You remember that story? John Roberts was reciting the oath to him, and he repeated it back to him as Roberts said it, but Roberts got one or two of the words out of order. Instead of that I will faithfully execute the offices of the United States, or whatever it is, he said that I will execute the office of the United States, or President of the United States, faithfully. And he said it that way. And then everybody was like, I don't know, that's not the exact wording that's in the Constitution. Maybe out of abundance of caution, you should retake the oath, do it in private. But that way you can say the oath was definitely administered the way it's written in the Constitution on January 20th, 2009. So fine, right? But they did do it over again. They didn't just say, well, the words are the same. They were just out of order. Everybody knows what he meant. And we've gone ahead and he's been signing executive orders and they're all fine. I mean, can you imagine Judicial Watch is challenging the validity of the executive orders based on he didn't recite the oath of office exactly as written. And some judge says, yeah, you're right. Well, normally you think no judge is going to throw out the presidency based on something like that. Well, just to be sure, we'll do it again, right? So, fine. But where's that scrutiny when it comes to were Trump executive orders properly executed? Were his appointments properly executed? Remember that there is also an example of the DHS nomination. Ken Cuccinelli sent improperly and illegally to DHS as one or another of the acting positions there. I can't remember which one he occupied. And they actually did reverse a lot of the things that were set in motion by Cuccinelli when he was there and there improperly. So, I mean, there's even precedent for that. Now, given all of this, plus the fact that he's on trial, apparently under the Espionage Act, for mishandling paperwork, I mean, that's one of the big federal criminal trials that he faces right now, effing up paperwork. And the fact that we always say, you gotta watch Trump with the paperwork, and he always fails. And then we watch him do it twice in this thing. I think that there's probably facially deficient lifetime appointments to the federal bench out there that we don't know about. And I don't know what to do about it. And on the other hand, courts are also equally practiced at saying, oh, it would be such a nightmare. What a headache. Never mind. I.e., well, why do courts accept facially invalid claims from mortgage companies that they hold the note on houses that they are foreclosing on, even when they can't prove that they have it? And then, in fact, upon further examination, it turns out they don't have it and never did. They never held the note on some of these houses that they're foreclosing on. This actually happens in the United States. As I said, David Dayen wrote books on it. And so sometimes courts find ways to say, meh, paperwork. But sometimes courts say, no, this isn't going to work. And I don't know. We'll never get an accounting of this. We're just too busy prosecuting him for other things, of course. And it's more important that we do those things. Okay. By the way, also some commentary from Mighty OCD coming in via the Blue Sky machine, pointing out some of the things that we were talking about earlier. One, of course, the comment about the thing in Israel calling the AI targeting machine originally the gospel is just trolling. I think that's probably true. It's just like appointing an oil lobbyist to run the EPA, or Ken Cuccinelli to run the Department of Homeland Security, for instance. And on other subjects, let's see, where is that where Obama got divisive with the soft I? Okay. Divisive or divisive, I see. It always drove me nuts when he said it wrong. Okay, so on our pronunciation stuff. I think there is some law school influence there. Divisive, divisive, adversary, adversary. And what did I say? Promissory. Oh boy. And then one other note here. Let's see. He's with me. How about that? The civil fraud bond for Donald Corleone being invalid is not just signing the rent check delay tactic. Yeah, all right. That being, of course, people were pointing to, what was that, Seinfeld? George Costanza saying that I often, make the mistake of not signing my rent check when I mail it or something like that. I forget the exact episode, but sounds familiar. Okay, let's see. Other things to squeeze in before we exit for the day. No way we're going to get to the long reads that I had in store for you. One from Quinta Jurecic on her reading through of the Eastman disbarment recommendation. But did you know we've gotten to that stage? We actually have an answer, a preliminary answer recommending disbarment for Eastman, but there's still a long process ahead before they lock that in which he gets to appeal and fight back as well. And of course, he's lying his fool ass off, or even having his own adult children lie their fool asses off. Although I'm sure they think that they're not lying. Defending him in the pages of The Blaze, I believe, which will help no one. The only thing I can probably squeeze in for you in case, let's see, today is April 5th, 6th, 7th, Monday will be the 8th. In case we're not on the air, remember that Wednesday, I guess, the 10th, if Monday's the 8th, Tuesday, Wednesday, the 10th is the date that we expect the House of Representatives to finally deliver its paperwork, believe it or not, on the Mayorkas impeachment. So far as the Senate is concerned, so far that thing doesn't exist, but they're planning for what to do with it, and then more speculation. The Hill is writing about what is expected when that thing is finally delivered. Their headline is, Schumer is expected to move quickly to dismiss Mayorkas impeachment. But then if you read through the actual article, they once again do the exercise of, well, there's also 10 other things that can happen, and we're not sure which one they're going to do. But, I mean, I guess the expectation is that they will move for a quick dismissal, and there is some indication that they might even get some Republican cooperation in doing that, or at least that there are some Republicans who would be willing to vote for an immediate dismissal of the charges. Whether or not they're going to be able to cast those votes over any objections from other Republicans who might stand in the way of taking that dismissal motion up, I do not know. But we'll have to see how that develops. Okay, and just a few minutes left here before we hand things off to, well, whatever. I don't know if Justice has got a pre-recorded program ready to go or some other substitute program ready to go, but I am reliably informed that at 11 o'clock on the dot, there's no more feed from here, so we want to try and be on time. So we'll just leave you with this wonderful weekend type item. Why not? This also suggested to me by Scott, unusual, CBS News report, Botswana. Look, it's international news. Botswana threatens to send 20,000 elephants to roam free in Germany in a public dispute over trophy hunting. There's no way to cram all of this one in here coherently except to say, look, Botswana, as it turns out, has essentially now a gigantic elephant reserve. They have 1/3 of the existing population of elephants on the planet in Botswana, and everybody kind of wants to preserve the elephants. And of course, there's trade and or, tourism, etc., big game hunting, licensure for hunting of elephants. And a lot of them are sold to German hunters. And the other end of the bargain is that German law is you can bring your trophies back with you. But the Germans are looking to restrict that, which will make the licenses less lucrative for Botswana, on top of which the Botswanans correctly say, well, we have an awful lot of elephants. And in fact, the way we control the population of elephants and, do our best to guarantee that they don't stampede and ruin the rest of Botswana is there's harvesting of elephants. And if you are going to restrict things and screw up our trade, what if we just send you live elephants? How about just like DeSantis and Greg Abbott, we're going to export our problem to you and just send you 20,000 live elephants and let them rampage throughout Germany and see how you like it. Well, of course, I don't know the logistics of that. I don't think the Botswanans can pull it off. I don't think they really mean to pull it off either, although the president of Botswana says, no, I'm serious about this. Of course, that would require the cooperation of German authorities to say, yeah, let's let them roam around and see what happens, as opposed to penning them up. But anyway, what an interesting story. I'll give you that one to read. Seeing the same problem from different perspectives. Out here, we all, poor elephants, we definitely want to preserve them. Botswanans saying, elephants, they're a dime a dozen. Oh my God, get them out of here.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, we may see you Monday. We may not see you Monday. We may see an eclipse Monday. We may not see an eclipse Monday. Could be anything. Anyway, enjoy the weekend. We'll tell you what's going to go on. We'll give you some advance notice. Thanks to Gil for sitting in with us today. We got to figure out how to make this thing work to everyone's advantage. I had a good time trying. Hope you did too. See you next week.